Welcome back. This video is going to walk you through some ideas from my book called Theories of Truth and Introduction. Came out in 2014, I believe, a few years ago, published with Bloomsbury Press. And in the introduction part, first chapter of the book, I try and clarify what truth is not. In a previous video, I tried to give you an argument that truth is not physical. Truth is not a physical thing, even though there might be truths about physical things. The truth itself is not something that's physical or material. And in this video, I want to walk you through an argument to the conclusion that truth is not linguistic. That is, truth essentially, being what truth is, does not involve language as such. Now, linguistic entities might serve indirectly as the bearers of truth, but bits of language are not themselves the things that are essential to truth as such. Truth as truth, truth qua truth. So if I take a simple example, like say I forget my keys on my desk, and I form a belief about where my keys are, and I form a belief that my keys are on my desk. Now I'll use that thought to guide myself to where I believe my keys are. So if I use that belief to walk back to my office and I look on my desk and I see my keys on my desk as exactly as I believe them to be, I can see the belief of my keys matching or conforming to the reality of the keys being on the desk. I can see the truth of my belief, and every single person has experienced that at one point or another in their life. So I take this to be a paradigm case of truth. And if you want to understand the concept of truth, or what truth is, you just need to exercise careful reflective analysis of these common sense everyday occurrences. Right? These are things that we experience all the time. Some recent theorists of truth maintain that thinking about truth requires only an analysis of our language use, or truth talk. The emphasis here is on theories that somehow truth is linguistic in nature. Okay? So here's a recent quote from a book that I think it's Maria Jose Frappoli, wonderful scholar and clear thinker, an excellent book on truth. But in that text, she offers a view of truth that truth requires requires a reflective and highly developed understanding of the different things that rational agents do with words. Okay, so this is, I think, a view of truth that extends throughout the latter half, at least the latter half of the 1900s and on into the 20s, the 2000s, the 2000s. It's, I think, a holdover from logical positivism, and it's the kind of view that maintains that if you want to understand metaphysics or even epistemology, you have to understand language use. Maybe it goes back to Wittgenstein. Maybe it's again a result of kind of logical empiricism and positivism, trends like that. A mistaken view about the nature of language, I think. So I want to reject this idea that truth as such has anything to do with language. So I think it's a mistake to identify or reduce a theory of truth to a theory of language, or to identify truth with language. So here's why. In the simple example I just gave about finding my car keys as I thought them to be, I believe many things. I've acted on my beliefs, and what I've done, what I've not done, though, is I haven't said anything, I haven't written anything, spoken, uttered, texted, tweeted. I'm not sure there are tweets anymore. X'd, I don't know what you call it now. Or I didn't use language in any way. I certainly could have. I could have said, oh, my keys are on my desk. I could have texted my wife, hey, I left my keys on my desk. LOL, be home late, love you. Could have texted that to someone, maybe my wife, maybe somebody else. Well, maybe not that exact text to somebody else. You get the idea. In this case, I didn't do any of these things. I simply thought, believed, looked, and saw. None of the mental acts in this case involved the use of language in any way. Now, if that's correct, then not only is truth independent from language, but our experience and knowledge of truth doesn't depend on language. Thus, the theory of truth can neither be reduced to linguistics, nor does the theory of truth even require an appeal to language. Now, here's a simple argument for the position I'm maintaining. Okay, this is a simple syllogism. Well, it's not super simple, but it's fairly easy to follow. Here's premise one. All intellectual acts are thoughts. Okay, so all intellectual acts that I have are thoughts. No thoughts are linguistic acts. Therefore, no linguistic acts are intellectual acts. Premise 4, all experiences of truth are intellectual acts. Therefore, premise 5, no intellectual acts are linguistic acts. Therefore, no experiences of truth are linguistic acts. Okay, so I've tried to make that syllogism as brief as possible. But the major objection to an argument like this will be on the second premise, and that premise is no thoughts are linguistic acts. And this objection will likely maintain that some of our mental states are linguistic entities in nature. So the way that I want to show that claim is false, that linguistic acts are mental states, or mental states are linguistic acts, is by reference to a paper written by Dallas Willard some time ago in the early 1970s. This is a paper called The Absurdity of Thinking and Language. And what Willard claims is the very conception of thinking in or with language involves an absurdity. So Willard comes to this conclusion by distinguishing thinking from language. Okay, so there's a difference between thought and language. So thoughts, Willard points out, are intentional states of persons. They're of or about something, because this is the intentionality of the mental. It's just the mark of the mental, maybe the essential mark of the mental. So first, thoughts are intentional states of persons, or in the mind. Second, language always involves sense-perceptible signs or symbols. In other words, there's no such thing as a language without some sense-perceptible sign or symbol, and some level of actual sensuous apprehension of those signs. Okay, those are two key important points that Willard reminds us of when it comes to language. Language always involves sense-perceptible signs and some actual level of sensuous apprehension of those physical signs whenever language is used. Okay, so Willard claims it's easy to produce cases where thought occurs without the presence of language. In fact, we do it all the time. Case considered here of thinking of where my keys are or thinking about my belief matching reality is just such a case. There are no physical signs involved here at all in these cases of thinking. If there were no physical signs, then no language is present. Thus, Willard concludes that we have here proof that thinking is not essentially the activity of operating with physical signs. So Willard continues his argument that if we think with language, then we must be doing something with, quote, with symbols, and so necessarily involves doing something to them, end quote. It's on page 131 of his original paper. Yet there are clear cases of thought where we don't do anything to or with signs. We don't do anything to or with signs in certain cases. There not being any signs in those kinds of cases, Willard points out. Okay. So he summarizes his point by saying that thought alone, mere thinking, can't do anything to signs, and thus can't do anything with signs. Okay. Now, if you can do things to signs by thinking about them, physical signs outside of your mind, just by thinking about them, let me know. We can start a sign company. We can just make signs by thinking about them. So if thought is not linguistic, if Willard's argument is sufficient to show that no thoughts are linguistic acts, then the second premise of the argument is reasonable. Again, what was that second premise? The second premise was no thoughts are linguistic acts. Okay, so one could maybe argue that, maybe premise one in the argument is faulty. All intellectual acts are thoughts. Right? Maybe that's by claiming that there are some intellectual acts which are not thoughts. Okay, but the emphasis on the premise should be act, an intellectual act. Okay, an act of the intellect is something that I do with my mind. I don't mean here that it's a state of the mind, but an activity of the mind. An activity of the mind will always have thought as an essential component. So intellectual acts have thoughts as essential components to it. Thus, intellectual acts are acts of thought. So Willard's argument, I think, right, this is part of my case here, could be broad to show that no mental states at all are linguistic. So if Willard is right that all linguistic entities have essentially as their nature physical signs or symbols, and it can be argued that no mental states are physical states, then it would follow that no mental states are linguistic entities. Okay. So now that's a pretty strong conclusion. This would be actually stronger support for the idea put forward here that truth, understood as conformity and the intellect, does not involve language. Okay, So suffice to say that we have clear cases of experiencing the world as we think it to be. These experiences involving thought don't make use of language, although they could. You could say something about it. You could describe it to someone. You could write it out. You could text it to somebody. Do an interpretive dance or whatever you like. Sign language. I mean, I don't know sign language, but you could use some kind of physical symbols. But we don't have to. The experience itself, involving thought, doesn't make use of language. Nor is it ever itself thought itself is never linguistic. So it follows then that a theory of truth or the meaning of truth will not require an essential component of theory or philosophy of language. Okay? So this is an important point, I think. What this does, in addition with my previous argument that thought is not physical, what it does is it allows truth to be an essential feature of the world that we access through our minds. And one of the things that indicates, I think, is that truth is not plausible as we experience it if the world is entirely naturalistic. In other words, I think our ordinary experiences of truth disprove materialism or metaphysical naturalism, ontological naturalism. Because when in an experience of truth, I think about the world and I find the world to be as it's thought, I am aware of a relation between my mind and the world that is not a physical relation. And even one part of the relata in the relation is not physical as well, namely my intellect and the beliefs and thoughts, even the mental representations that I have are themselves not linguistic. Okay, so any attempt to make sense of truth solely by linguistic analysis totally misses the point of what truth is. In fact, I think it leads to various absurdities as well, as I followed Dallas's paper on the absurdity of thinking in language. Okay. Thanks for your time. The next video walk you through some ideas about where truth is located in the discipline of philosophy. So philosophy is a pretty broad discipline, and sometimes you might wonder, how does truth fit in an overall view of what philosophy is? Thanks for listening.
Stay psyched, Grom. You.